Karibu kwenye MSASA, where we talk to successful people about failure. Over the last couple of, let's say 5 years, 5 years, or should I say since Magufuli came into power, kitu kimoja ambacho Watanzania wengi tumekuwa tukikisema ukiulizwa, oya, uko poa, mambo vipi? Tupo, tunapambana. Na binafsi, as I'm growing up and I am adulting, kule kupambana kuko kama hakuishi yani. Yani maisha ni kupambana. Mwanaume ni kupambana. And it comes with everything, the good and the bad. Something else though that I'm learning is being a student of life is one of the most fulfilling experiences ever. Because with life, there is a lot of good, and the good is influenced by people. And I really like people. I'm starting to really, really like people because people are interesting. They're unique. They're different. They're so diverse. There are things we connect on and there are things we don't connect on. And I like that because I like cocktails of things. I like it when things that may not always be so obvious are put in the same thing and they're just delicious. Like, nikikumbuka ile Milo breakfast or random lunches that once in a while I get to make and I'm never able to make it the same way. It's because nilifungua friji kuka kuna karoti ambayo iko nusu, afu kuna hoho moja, afu hamna nyanya lakini kuna vitunguu saumu vingi. And then I mix it up and it works. Today our guest is a guest who I think is a unique mix of different experiences. A man of science, a man of data, and a man of God. Arthur, karibu.
Asante. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for having me on the MSASA podcast.
Yeah. So leo nitakuchallenge, nitakuongelesha Kiswahili kingi as if na mimi najua Kiswahili kivu.
Hamna shida. Tajaribu. Nikiumba kidogo, hamna shida. There's an editor, he will cut those parts out.
Yeah. Arthur. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what you do right now. Mm-hmm. You have a very interesting career where you've been growing within the same organization for almost, 10 years?
Close to 10 years.
Close to 10 years. Yeah. Can you tell me about that path? Mm-hmm.
So, the work I do is quite interesting and I enjoy it. I currently work at Coca-Cola, Beverages Africa, which is a franchise partner of the Coca-Cola company. And I've been with them or we call it the Coke system for about close to 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year. And the work that I do mainly surrounds data. I do analytics, which is the process of taking data and trying to draw insight out of the data to help people, decision makers particularly in the organization, try and make more informed and better decisions, not just for now, but also for the foreseeable future, whether that be the next month, the next quarter, the next year, the next 10 years. Data is always involved, and data is the thing I enjoy to do and the thing that I actually work in currently. And I've been doing that for the past 10 years, as I mentioned, close to 10 years. Yeah.
So typically, what does your day-to-day look like?
My day-to-day, it starts off with opening my inbox and seeing if there's any emails or any chat messages. In fact, now we're transitioning away from inbox and more to like Teams messages.
Right.
Checking my inbox in that regard, not necessarily the traditional one.
Yeah.
Responding to any queries that people may have. And then based off of the project that I'm working on and the kind of deliverables that I need to deliver, I begin to set out my day, knowing which tasks I'm going to tackle first and executing them as such. I check as well. So I set aside 2 hours of focus time in the morning. Okay. And then 2 hours is for me to lay out my day and then also to prepare for any meetings that I need to attend.
Right.
And then, I get into it. And it's always an adventure. I'm not too sure what the day will plan out in terms of what it will look like.
Right.
Or the different responses I'll get from people, the different requests. But it's always to do with data and people's responses to the insights that I do provide.
That's very interesting. So what I'm trying to understand is, because with data, sometimes you're looking for particular kinds of information to make particular kinds of decisions. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming there are times when you come across data and that influences things. Mm-hmm. do you know how to look out for these things, or is it like a combination of, having vendors who are consistently mining data and sharing reports with you, and you analyze that? Like,
well, it's always you have to be cognizant of certain biases that you have when it comes to data.
Okay.
And when I receive data, if I already have a conclusion in my mind, I'm going to look for data that supports that conclusion.
Right.
Which isn't an honest way of actually...
Because
exactly. Unatetea what it is you already believe, as opposed to letting what the data says speak for itself,
right,
and draw conclusions from that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very difficult thing to do in an organization where perhaps gut feel of people, particular people who've been in the organization for a long time, tends to be stronger, and you almost need to realize that the data you present sometimes may go against what the gut feel says. But as long as you're being objective and saying that this is what the facts say, you almost leave it in the hands of leadership to decide what to do with it.
Right.
But sometimes the response will not be positive if it doesn't align to what people's conclusions already or predetermined conclusions are.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just to make sure I don't have those predetermined conclusions, and I'm as objective as possible.
So you stay as neutral as you can be.
As neutral as I can be.
Okay.
Which can be difficult. I sometimes need to call myself out on that because I'm working on a project and I want it to go a certain way, then I'm going to try look for data that looks a certain way.
Yeah.
But then if the data doesn't look that certain way, it's my duty to say that. And
I think we all fall victim to that.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, in my context, we make marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
Whenever you make a marketing campaign and you're presenting 2-3 options, there's always an option that you like the most.
Yeah.
Na saa zingine mpaka unaipanga kwa namna where either you start really strong and then the rest is not so great, or you build up and then the last one is like alafu it doesn't always work out that way. Unakuta ni anachokipenda mteja ni tofauti. Na you have to catch yourself kwamba, okay, listen to the feedback. Is this feedback objective? Na usije kuwa unang'ang'ania kwa sababu you think it's a good idea. Yeah. I do wonder though, in the context of a business, because you do the data analytics, right?
Yeah.
And you offer insights based off the information that's been provided.
Correct.
And I'm pretty sure in different points in time, you might be involved in even mining that data.
Yeah.
And then unawapatia leadership, the business heads, I would assume, right?
Yeah.
To make decisions. Sasa, kwenye context ya mfanya biashara, you can be entrepreneurial within an organization. It's called intrapreneurial, right? Sometimes people have to rely on their gut. How do you find the balance there? For like a business owner, when do I listen to an Arthur? And when do I say, Arthur, thank you, but no, I'm going to do this. And then, kwa sababu pia, nisipopatia Arthur nakwambia, but I told you the data, the numbers don't lie.
I think that's an interesting thing that you're bringing up, because I realize, and this is a bias that people with data tend to have. They tend to think that the data encapsulates 100% of the most perfect response. What I mean by that is what the data says is what it is, and you should respond according to what the data says. But I've learned that life isn't like that. And how I've learned is, in my whole data cocoon, I can think very analytically and very objectively. However, my wife and I, we have a small business, but she's the chief driver of the business. And what we do is we sell hair. Now, different kinds of hair, different products, different trends, whatever it may be. And I'm the objective guy. And in fact, I was struggling with the fact that we didn't have data when the business started. And I said, okay, I'm going to help my wife by ensuring that we have processes which can collect that data. And I can then report on that data and let her know that actually you're wasting money here and you're making money here and you should buy more of this and less of that. However, in that experience, I've realized that actually a lot of it is not just objective data. And some of the decisions that she makes based off of subjective gut feel have actually had positive impact on the business. So it's not just the objective analytical data, which I tend to be more strong in. It's also the gut feel, which is why I guess you need business leaders and entrepreneurs to actually depend on both. And the balance should be found for business leaders and people who are entrepreneurial to know that, okay, data has its place, but also gut feel has its place. And me being more biased towards the analytical objective side, I can definitely say that I've seen, in a personal context, I've seen it go the other way when decisions went not according to the data, but more according to gut feel. And similarly in business, in my experience as well, sometimes you can say, okay, this is what the data says, but business people, based off of their years and years of experience, far more than me. Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. It works like this.
That. So sometimes it can be frustrating to me, the guy who's like, this is what the data says.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's a balancing act. And people who are business leaders, I believe, actually should trust their gut more.
Right.
Yeah.
So have you ever been have you ever had to be in an instance where you had to make sense of a gut instinct of something else or someone else?
I wouldn't say I made sense of it. I more accepted it. I accepted that their gut feel is saying, this is the best way we should move forward. Na nimekubali tu. Obviously in my inside, I'm like, yeah, but that's not what the numbers say.
Yeah.
But in that yielding, I think I've become more appreciative of the skill.
Yeah.
It's more creative, sort of qualitative skill.
Yeah.
Of gut feel.
Yeah.
Because sometimes gut feel is correct.
Yeah.
It will be correct maybe sometimes in some contexts more often than what the numbers say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So does that mean numbers lie? Numbers don't lie.
I would not say
follow your gut instinct.
I'm still very biased towards the numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say that. But sometimes the numbers can have blind spots, which would require someone who has either experience or gut feel or talent, natural talent, to pick out, which data doesn't accommodate for.
Yeah. And I guess to a very large degree, not just being entrepreneurial, I think just being a leader comes with the art of learning how to balance, learning how to balance numbers and gut instincts, learning how to balance stakeholders and your team, learning how to balance demand and supply, personalities, personal life and work life. And on the context of balance, you too are a leader, even in what you do, but also in a different setting. And more specifically, you're an elder in a church.
Yeah.
Embu naomba nielimishe kidogo. Unajua mimi ninavyojuaga. Elder si wazee wa kanisa.
Yeah, wazee wa yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
How how are you an elder?
Sasa. Hapo ndo, I think even as I say it in Swahili, wazee wa kanisa, it makes me think or feel like I should be older than I am. But if you read the Bible, essentially in the church, when it began post resurrection of Christ, and being a man of faith, that's actually the manifesto by which we operate. An elder is just simply someone who lives a life, is a leader in the church, does what the Bible says Christians should do. But the only differing factor is that they have the ability to teach, and they have been recognized for having leadership qualities that go beyond the normal church attender. So it's literally doing what the Bible says you should do as a Christian, but people around you recognizing that you have either an ability to ability to teach is definitely one of them, and leadership qualities which would make you a viable candidate for leadership. So it's a bit it's a departure from, let's say, I'd say mainstream traditional way of doing church, where you'd think that an elder would have been like a bishop who has gone through theology school, etc., etc.
Because we associate elder with age because we assume age is somehow connected, but not somehow, it's connected to wisdom.
Yeah.
Unajua?
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to say that with age comes no benefit. With age definitely comes benefit, as you've highlighted.
Yeah.
But also with what I've understood as well is maturity in particularly the things of God may be correlated with age, but correlation isn't necessarily causation, meaning it's not because of age that someone is mature. It's because in the time when they were mature, let's say, and the passage of time, they were doing active things to ensure that they continue to mature.
Right.
So in that regard, I didn't choose to become an elder. Let me just put that out there.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that I aspired to.
Yeah.
Not to say it's something that I was against.
Yeah.
But it was not. It was something that was completely off of my radar.
Yeah.
But walking a journey with other believers within a community, it took other leaders walking alongside me to say, we actually see something in you. And that development process has eventuated in me being an elder. But it's not something I signed up for. But it's something that I believe God is requiring of me in the season of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the name of your church, though.
Oh, is it?
God's Tribe?
God's Tribe Church. That's the name of the church. Yeah.
Tunajua?
Yeah.
It's the click.
The click. But it actually comes from the fact that towards the end of the book in the Bible, it says, when people at the end, when we finally, the consummation of all things, it says the people that stand before God are from every tribe, nation, and tongue. So actually, God's tribe is the most diverse kind of gathering of people that will ever exist.
Right.
Yeah. So God's tribe is more diverse than what we would think a tribe would mean.
Yeah, it's a dope name.
Yeah.
Mimi nataka nije tu kwa sababu ni God's Tribe. Sinajua, where are you? Where do you pray? I pray at the God's Tribe.
At God's Tribe.
Yeah. God's Tribe choir.
Yeah.
Mimi natumikia bwana.
Yeah.
Leo natumikia kanisani. Kanisani liko wapi? Niko Semfani. Naitwaje? Into God's Tribe. Nataka tu niulize maswali ili nifikie pale.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
That's a lot coming from a creative guy.
Right?
Yeah,
I think it's a very cool name. Somebody was creative and thoughtful.
Yeah.
Did you? It's a Pentecostal church.
It's I would say it's non-denominational in the sense that it's not particularly belonging to any particular, let's say, denomination.
Okay.
So it's non-denominational, interdenominational, but it would have evangelical and to some degree Pentecostal.
Okay.
Expressions within the congregation.
Okay. Growing up, did you grow up in like a strong religious family?
So growing up, how did I grow up? I grew up in, let's say, from the very beginning. My father was Catholic and my mother was Muslim.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
My father was Catholic and my mother was Muslim. So grew up going to mass. However, when I was 10, my father passed away, unfortunately. But that was also the time my mother came to faith, and she became a Bible-believing Christian. She got born again.
Okay.
And from the age of 10, grew up in what I would say is a religious household. We went to church every Sunday, Wednesday, whatever it may be. Very Pentecostal as well. I think that's the background we were exposed to growing up. And in that, growing up in the church, that's essentially the environment I found myself. But it was only when I was outside of that environment that I realized that actually my belief wasn't necessarily rooted in the truth of Scripture. It was more rooted in the environment in which I found myself.
What does that mean? Could you elaborate?
Yeah. So to elaborate on that, so when you grow up in a household, you tend to live by the rules of that household.
Yeah.
And the rules in our household was that on Sunday you went to church, on Wednesday you went to either Bible study or whatever it may be. And that's consistently how it has been for many years.
Yeah.
So you can attach a piece of your identity to say that I am a Christian because I do these things, right? But it was when I went to university where outside of that ecosystem, I didn't desire to do any of those things, which were part of my identity for such a long time.
Growing up.
So in my mind, it's like, are those things part of my identity? Or, I mean, do I really believe in God? And am I a Christian and a believer? Because what was I was a product of my environment, but that was not attached to my genuine personal faith in any way.
Okay.
It was more living off of the faith of my mother, for example, or the faith of the community that I was part of by way of being in a household that was practicing Christianity.
Okay.
So that began the stream of questioning to ask, okay, what do you believe? And why do you believe it? And is it something that you have deep conviction for? Because if I read the Bible, I see people willing to die. But I'm not willing to wake up on a Sunday to go to service if I'm not told to, or that I need to do it, or that's because I'm in a household that does it. So that began the line of questioning in my heart to really find out what is at ground zero in terms of my faith.
Okay.
Yeah. So that began the journey of me actually seeking out God personally to find him.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can say I did.
Okay. Can you, how do I say this? How do I phrase this? I mean, in the process of discovery, do you know why it didn't result in you being, I guess, more Catholic?
Yeah, more Catholic, yeah. Well, I think the reason why it didn't result in me being more anything is because I sought to define what belief would, or not, that's a bad wording. I wanted to just, from ground zero, figure out what actually the Bible says about God and what believing looks like, which I didn't want, or even without knowing, I didn't want to be influenced by a set denomination or a set standard of rules or the things that I've been exposed to growing up. It's to say, God, if you're there and you exist, I want to know you.
Okay.
Reveal yourself to me, because I'm in a situation where I realize that the faith that I have is actually
not mine.
Shadows and mirrors. Exactly. It's not mine. So if you are indeed real, I need to know that, and I need you to show me yourself. Now, how that comes through and the message, I mean, the way in which that comes through isn't in a box of denomination or religion. I mean, let's say traditional religious practices.
Right.
But God, in his mercy, because he's has the capacity to manage the diversity of our personalities and our life experiences, knows how to use the messaging and knows how to use the situations and circumstances around you to communicate that very message. To make you actually know that this is God and this is God talking to me and this is what God is saying. Because the way in which he speaks is not general. It's very bespoke.
Bespoke, yeah. Bespoke. It's personalized.
Exactly.
You.
To you.
You just have to find him in you. Right?
And discern his voice in the plethora of messages that you'd receive, I guess. And I think having the open heart maybe is what God, by his grace, he spoke. And I was able to understand what he was saying.
Where did the questioning come from, though? Did you have like a friend, a mentor, an ndugu, a relationship? Because like it came from somewhere, right? Where did it come from? Why did you start questioning?
Yeah, I'd say the questioning started. It started from, I'd say, first and foremost, me being surprised that what I thought was a core part of my life isn't a part of my life.
Okay.
Or isn't as core as I thought it was.
Okay.
Which became very apparent when I was away from home.
kwamba ulikuwa hujisikii kwenda.
Exactly. And when I was at home, I thought I did, but I didn't actually. Because now when I'm the master of my schedule, it's not there and it's not going to make it onto the list.
Right.
At least for however long. I'd go to church like once every 2-3 months. But that to me, every time I went, I was like, actually, it's not where I want to be. So that's why it was. I found it very peculiar. But because it was peculiar to me, that's actually what started the line of questioning. But I would say it's only after I began a genuine journey of faith, where I actually encountered people who had answers to the questions that I had. Because the questions I was asking essentially, and at its core, is if God is real and I am to have a relationship with him, or I'm to believe in him, how do I know a God who is infinite? How do I know a God who created all things and exists outside of time? And people had answers to those questions, which were rooted in this text called the Bible.
Right.
And those answers resonated with my heart. So it gave me that solid ground to stand on all the more.
Was it a challenging experience, or was it smooth sailing? Like it was just discovery and discovery and discovery?
No.
Discovery? Or was it like, nope, okay?
It was very, what's this? Lots of turbulence, ups and downs, I can say.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because you encounter a God and you read the scriptures and you're like, okay, I can't live up to these standards. But I also know that he's a God who really genuinely loves me.
Yeah.
So reconciling, I think, my shortcomings and not allowing them to draw me away from a loving God. Because you may think, or personally I thought for a very long time, that it was up to my good behavior or the standard that I keep that would make me acceptable to God. But God is like, I accept you flaws and all as you are. And yes, I can understand that, sure. But now, how do I move forward? When I actually still do the things that I know for a fact you don't like. I see that you don't like them. But
what were you doing out there? Don't tell me. I don't want to know.
We'll save that for season 2. Yeah. But yeah, it was turbulent in the sense that sometimes you may feel that you're not worthy. Sometimes you may not understand yourself. That if I believe what I'm reading, why does my life not reflect that?
Yeah.
But walking through that, walking through that journey, you actually discover that God is a very personal God and he wants to walk through a transformation journey with you, which means you'll not be the finished product in day one.
Yeah.
And when I'm 80 or 90 years old, I will still not be a finished product.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I won't. If I live that long, God willing. So that journey is actually a relational journey and not a performance-based one.
A relational journey, not a performance-based journey. So it's a relationship that you're constantly building?
That you're constantly, yes. Are we building and...
Learning?
Learning.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. I know personally, my experience with religion is still a process of discovery.
Yeah.
It's like a very long discovery call that has a lot of breaks in between. I am victim to blaming God for some things not going my way. Mpaka namsusia mshikaji. And then I catch myself and then najirudia. And then, have those. And then also, your kitu kwamba kwa mfano, mimi nimezaliwa Mlutheri.
Okay.
So I identify as Mlutheri. Okay. But every now and then I ask myself, hivi ningechagua, and you say something interesting where, you're born into something, but then eventually you have to decide, proactively make the decision kwamba, is this something that you identify with going forward au umerithishwa kitu ambacho you may or may not be living your truth. With most journeys, especially religious ones, Can you remember a moment that made you want to fight even harder to continue the journey up until to the level that you are now? I mean, you're still in discovery, but you're in a much different level of discovery than most of us.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because fight is the right word. When did I need to fight? And the reason I'll say that the word fight is appropriate is because for me, it was when I was confronted with a very real temptation to get offended at a God I don't understand. Meaning things happened and things happen that don't make sense to you. Things happen that are totally left field that you'll be like, okay, if there is a God, how in the world could this ever have happened? And if that is the case, then that temptation is a temptation that I personally needed to fight almost every day for a good couple of years to say. And then temptation is getting offended at God. Because if up until that point, I was fully convinced that this is God, this is who he is, he's good, not just to me, he's good to humanity, in spite of the failures and the sufferings of the world. And because X, Y, and Z have happened to me, now do I throw that deep conviction that I have away? And throwing that away would actually mean the ground beneath me is going. Because before I wasn't sure of my faith. And then it became the solid ground I stood on. And now in the face of temptation of getting offended at God and setting him aside, am I going to break down the very solid ground that he helped build underneath me?
When you say getting offended by God, what do you mean? Do you mean like you feel like he hasn't done right by you? Or
that he has done things which don't make sense to me. Okay. And he has not, like you say, not done right by me, but again, by my very human standards and judgment.
Yeah.
But it's a fight because that line of thinking is very strong. And it can really draw you away from the very relationship that you prized. Being for me personally, it was my relationship with God. And I needed to fight day by day to ensure that when those thoughts come to say, okay, you say God is fair and he's good, but X, Y, and Z have happened. Why have they happened? Is God really good? Because if he is good and he's all powerful and sovereign as you believe, it means that he allowed what happened to happen. He has allowed what has happening or keep on happening to happen. So how do you love a God like that? How do you call him fair? How do you worship someone who isn't for you by my definition?
How do you?
By submitting and submitting. They say, people will say, I trust God, right? Or people will say that I trust you, Elisha, as the leader of this company, for example. But trust is only put to the test when or rather you go through a situation where it becomes difficult to trust the very person or the thing that you've been trusting in. And trust gets tested. And I've come to learn that trust is extreme sports. It's extreme sports when it gets severely tested to the point where it's like, okay, if you say you trust God, it means you at some point will have to be okay with not understanding everything. And yeah, go ahead.
That's very interesting. I think it's very interesting also coming from you. Why? Because you're a very analytical person, though.
Exactly.
Right? Like everything has to be objective.
Correct.
1 + 2 is 3, not 4, not 3.5. And you do data and insights and, for a living, right?
Yeah.
And what you do, the work you do, informs other people to make the right decisions for their businesses, and business is a numbers game.
Correct.
How is it, Sasa kwamba, you can be so objective and so logical and numerical, right? Like, na huku kwingine, I'm not sure. Can you be as logical with faith?
In a nutshell, and just so the answer is brief, no, you can't. And the reason why, and again, that's why I called it a fight. It's still a fight because it's almost like I'm going against the grain of how I'm wired. I'm wired logical, objective. That's essentially a large part of my life. But on this side, trust is not logical. Trust isn't founded on data. There's no data report that I got from God to explain why X, Y, and Z is the way that it is, or why life is going the way that it is. That report, if it was released, it didn't come to me. And the reason why faith is not logical or analytical or based on data, because the only data we have is what's in the Bible.
Right.
And even when we ask God why, 99% of the time is you will not get an answer. So it's not, and I don't want to make it sound like it's blind faith, but for me personally, in the scriptures, I encountered a person who I believe to be trustworthy. When the data did not align with that, I had to fight and make a decision to say, I am still going to trust in this person who I discovered and in his character and not in the data.
Right.
And faith will 99% of the time not be logical, at least in the present.
Right. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Arthur, what has been your best failure?
Best failure. Best failure, I would say, I think not getting a job directly after university.
Okay. Tell me about that. What do you mean?
And I would say I'm calling it a failure, but it's not like I had control over it. But anyway, the reason why I'll say is, so I graduated from university, studied 4 years, and it was a good institution. And I'd say 90% of the people that I graduated with had jobs even before they graduated. So going into life with that expectation, I was like, okay, as soon as I graduate, like within a month or two, surely. Exactly. Mambo ya so someone will say, there's a star. Let me hire him.
Computer science.
Whatever it may be. I was like, okay, it's fine. 1 month, I'll wait. 2 months, I'll wait. After 3, 4, 5 months, I think the reality of the mindset I had confronted me face to face. And the mindset I had was one that was entitled, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
One that expected the world to yield to my big, lofty thoughts and dreams that I had in my head, which it didn't work out that way for one reason or another. And I call that a good failures because from that, I learned a lesson, which I carry till today, which is it's not, first of all, I overcame the entitlement and the loftiness of whatever it may be.
It humbled you?
It humbled me.
Okay.
Correct. It humbled me. And in that humility, I discovered a sort of tenacity and a mindset that was more ready, let's say, for any life experience, particularly in the work field, in the career field.
Right.
Any life experience, even if it didn't match my standards. Because had I received whatever that red carpet welcome that I thought I was going to get, I would have had to learn that lesson much harder later in life when the stakes are higher, when I have a family, kids, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
then you come encounter face to face with your entitlement and your whatever it may be, which isn't going to feed a growth mindset. It's going to take away from it. So that period of time I had a lot of undoing in my mind to say, okay, if you're going to start work, you should start work with the right mindset.
Right.
And that right mindset is, it's a privilege to work.
Yeah.
I'm working. Whatever they ask me to do, even if it's not in line with what it is I thought initially what life would look like, to accept that.
How long did it take to get a job?
About 7 or 8 months. But it was 7 or 8 months longer than I expected.
Right, because you expected
immediately,
right? Yeah.
And that, so it's different from someone who didn't expect it.
Yeah.
Even if we had the same time window, I probably went through much more suffering than the person who was actually more open to opportunities.
So, for instance, did you get it in a slightly different way as a result of that? Or was it just a regular application? You got called in?
It was many applications, but it was a different way in the sense that it was a job in Tanzania, and I didn't live in Tanzania at the time.
Oh, right. At the time, you didn't live in Tanzania.
Yes, I lived in Eswatini, Swaziland,
okay,
formerly called. That's where I lived, and that's where most of my life was based.
Okay.
So I think the undoing of my mindset made me even open to. By the way, my parents were Tanzanian.
Okay.
So that's why that's the connection between why I ended up in Tanzania.
Okay.
Because I'm a Tanzanian citizen and have been my whole life.
Okay.
Even though I grew up and was born somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that you getting out of your comfort zone, or?
Yeah, it was going on an adventure.
It was going on an adventure.
Yeah, it was going on an adventure, and it has been a wonderful adventure.
Okay.
So I'm really glad that I came face to face with that mindset much earlier on in my life.
Okay. Did the job meet your standard, or did it eventually become a standard?
It eventually did. Initially, it had some parts of it which I felt were, which I would have struggled with had I been entitled, quote unquote. But because I already overcame that hurdle, I was much more open-minded, but also that attitude did not, any misaligning of expectations did not leak into my attitude to work, which means I still worked faithfully.
Right.
I still brought my all every single day,
right,
even though it wasn't, let's say, the best thing that I envisioned in my mind. But having the right kind of mindset provided me with the strength to show up every single day and to perform at my best every single day, even though things are not aligned to my expectations. Which, had I had a different mindset, I don't think I would have had the level of results that I experienced because of the right kind of attitude. Yeah.
And this mindset, was it influenced by any particular thing other than the fact that you were not getting a gig?
I think it was influenced by, because at some point I also had to come face to face with the fact that even though my mindset was up here, I observed the life of those closest to me. And at the time, my mother, who was very close to me, had gone through difficult challenges in her life. But she had the right kind of mindset, because I have observed, reflecting 8 months at home, lots of time to reflect, that she exhibited a kind of mindset that I didn't have, which was way more resilient, way more positive, way more pleasant than I did. And
by pleasant, do you mean positive? Or what do you mean by pleasant?
I mean, pleasant is, if things aren't going your way, how do you act?
Okay.
Are you still a pleasant human being? Or are you one who would complain, get miserable, get angry, whatever it may be? So that's what I mean by pleasant.
Okay.
And she exhibited a mindset that was way more, I realized I didn't have it.
Okay.
So that as well was part of what would have or was influencing how I acted.
Okay. If you've gotten advice from someone and you're like, have you ever gotten advice from someone that you took and then very soon later realize that, oh, that was some really bad advice?
I may have to pick my words. Yeah, I have received advice.
What's the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Okay. The worst advice would have been, or is rather, you need to fight, and I'm thinking of how to frame it, because you need to fight for what is yours.
You need to fight for what is yours.
Yes.
Okay. Why is that bad advice?
It's bad advice because you need to fight for what you believe is yours by your current state, experiences, and limited line of sight. So I do not discount the fact of working hard and being tenacious in what you believe in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all driven by vision. That's what we need to keep driving towards. But the fighting for what is yours is oftentimes at the expense of character.
Okay.
No, not oftentimes. Let me just, in the way that I applied that advice was at the expense of character. Meaning, I was like, okay, let me fight for what is mine.
Okay.
But it was actually what I believed to be mine at the time, and it really wasn't mine. And also, it compromised character just to fight for this thing. And fighting in that regard is energy being expensed to do something which was really self-centered.
So,
okay.
correct me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah.
You said you need to fight for what is yours. Is bad advice.
No, it was bad advice.
It was bad advice
because of how I applied it.
Because of how you applied it.
Yeah. Because there is an aspect of that advice which is very
right.
wise.
Context matters.
Correct,
Yes,
yeah.
And then what you're saying is you need to fight for what you believe is yours.
I was saying how the place where I went wrong is because I was fighting for what I believed was mine, based off of my limited.
So your belief was the limitation.
My belief of it was the limitation, as well as my execution thereof, based off of the advice I received. Yeah.
Okay, so what was the right way to go about that?
I think, well, if you were to ask me this question 5 years ago, I would have responded differently.
Right. You're always evolving.
I'm always evolving.
Yeah.
5 years ago, I would have said, I would have first and foremost ensured that I was doing it for the right motives.
Okay.
Fighting for this thing for the right motives. Fighting for it for the right outcomes, and ultimately ensuring that at least to some degree I was not compromising my values.
Okay.
Right. But that was 5 years ago.
Okay.
Which is it was a very healthy place from where I was.
Okay.
To get to that point.
Okay.
But 5 years into the future, I would say that in my journey with me walking with God, I realized that even the good things, even something that I can fully deem as being wonderful, and other people would agree with me that this is wonderful, may not necessarily be what God is telling you is yours.
Okay.
Meaning that the standard by which I would measure a thing being appropriate or right and mine would be if God is saying that.
And how do you know he's saying it?
So that's why it's the longer. Again, we have how many minutes? Because we could carry on this conversation for days, but
is it in some way connected to a calling?
Purpose.
A purpose.
A purpose, but also beyond a purpose, a desire to live out the purpose that has already been laid out for you.
A desire to live out.
Even if it's in opposition to what you deem to be best today.
Wow. That is a lot to chew on.
It's a lot. I'm still chewing on it. Still learning that lesson, but yeah. In the limited time we have, that's how I wouldn't be able to unpack that any further. Yeah.
In the context of the work you do with data, what kind of movies do you like?
So movies, I enjoy a good drama, thriller. No, not drama. No, drama and thriller.
Okay,
those are the genres I like. Something that tests the mind a bit. So yeah,
and it's exciting.
Yeah, and then Marvel movies. Unfortunately,
that's not a bad thing.
Well, I mean, many people have much to say about Marvel movies, but I don't read the comics, so I have no reference point.
Yeah.
So Marvel movies.
Yeah. If you were to produce a movie about yourself, what would the title be?
What would the title be? The Curious Case of Arthur Kyara.
Curious Case of Arthur Kyara.
No, I'm just referencing the Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
All right.
But it would be something, I guess, to that regard, because I'd say, my life has been non-linear in that regard. If I were to write a story about my life 10 years ago, there'll be many chapters that I've lived which I wouldn't be in there. So I think something that is themed along the lines of the Curious Case of something would be the name that I would give my life.
It's a good title.
Yeah.
So I want us to move on to a particularly very interesting segment of our show.
Yeah.
Inaitwa nje ya boxi. And in today's particular episode, I would like us to talk about going to market. I guess in your context, it's route to market.
Yeah.
That's the lingo you would use. So help paint a picture for me and for anybody else who would be watching this. Kwenye context ya Tanzania, if you are in FMCG, right, you have a fast-moving consumable product. What are the checkpoints? And, from an analytical standpoint, but also from an experience standpoint, what are the checkpoints you definitely need to consider when you're trying to make mpango mkakati wa kuingia sokoni?
Yeah. So first and foremost is location. And a location is the location of the product that you're trying to sell. And we're talking physical product.
Right.
The location of that product and the location of the...
Let's say the product is sugar.
Sugar.
Yeah.
Okay. So the factory and the place or the area in which you want your product to consistently be available.
Okay.
And in the context of Tanzania, if you've grown up in Dar es Salaam and lived in Dar es Salaam your whole life, you may not have context of just how rural, and let me say, unlike Dar es Salaam, the rest of Tanzania is.
Yes. So,
kabisa.
Yeah.
And traveling around the country and seeing that reality makes me realize that the things that you build, the systems you build, the route to market strategies need to encompass that majority, the reality of that majority.
Okay.
Because that's where people are. We may say there's a lot of people in Dar es Salaam, but that's less than 10% or at least 10% of the whole country. Population. So from a rural context, for example, how you do get your product to where it needs to be is, first of all, where is your factory and where is the area that you want to supply?
Okay.
In between that point, what's the distance? And you need to start thinking distribution. How am I going to get the product to that place?
Right.
It will not be efficient for you to drive back and forth to a place that is, let's say, 200 kilometers away. But 200 kilometers away, you have people living there and you have activity taking place and you have consumption happening. So the ideal thing would be to set up a distribution point within that vicinity, the vicinity of interest.
Right.
And
so location is location of the factory.
Yep.
Location is also location of
the endpoint.
The endpoint?
The consumer, let's say.
The consumer. And the pickup point.
The distribution point.
The distribution point.
we call it a distribution point, but a place where you'll be able to ship a large consignment of stock, and from that point, then distribute into the area.
Okay.
That's the most efficient way of doing it.
Okay.
And in rural areas or rather in most of Tanzania, we tend to locate ourselves around centers.
Okay.
So even though it's vastly rural, there'll be centers of activity and centers of people. So you want a distributor that will be close by.
Okay, so location.
Location and a distribution point that is quite central to surrounding areas.
Right.
That's number 2. And number 3, and I'm saying this because, yes, I work in data, but data is very important.
Okay.
Because the data is actually what would ensure that if you place a distribution point, or if you look for an investor to invest in a distribution point in the middle of, or rather, let's say in a rural area, that they'll make enough money for their business to survive. And the kind of data you need is what are the number of outlets or shops that are in the area? What's the population of the area? What's the average income of that area, if available?
Socioeconomic class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even in the lower sections of society, they are straighter, meaning there are levels. And to know what those levels are, what is the...
Are those like LSMs?
LSMs, yes.
Right.
So even in the lower LSMs, there's still nuances which you need to consider if you're opening up a business. Now, if something is as uniform as sugar, you may have other distributors because sugar is easy to get, and sugar will. So you need to have data on the competitors and the people who are supplying the same thing in the area, because they'll be competing for the same pie. And then also having data around how much petrol it takes to get to that area or to distribute in that area effectively. Because even though I can have a center, that center can be 20 or 30 kilometers away from the next center. How much would constant distribution daily between those 2 points cost? And then...
So basically managing your logistics.
Managing your logistics and the cost of running the business.
Yes.
As well as now modeling all of that in a way that would ensure that at the end of the month, at least the person who has invested X million will be able to take something home.
Okay.
So I'd say it's location.
Yes.
And distribution points and having the right amount of data.
Okay.
And then over and above that, which sometimes gets overlooked, is financial and business acumen for the person who's to open the business.
Okay.
Because we sometimes assume that someone who has capital knows how to run a business. Now, someone can have capital, they can invest 50 million today, open a distributor, be in a perfect area that will ensure their profitability, but they do not know how to manage their books. Which means when they see money coming in, they think that, oh, that money is mine.
Kuna
faida here. There's no accounting. So you begin to take money out of the business. You're like, oh, okay, some expenses have creeped in, let me spend. And you keep spending and you keep spending. But you're slowly sucking out the very capital that you placed into the business. And the unfortunate thing is that business will then begin to die a slow death. So in the long-term thinking of getting a product into a place, they should be either education or ensuring that the principles of running a business and managing books of a business should be provided.
And what about things like competition and marketing and stuff like that? Yeah.
So competition is very important. It's important because, first and foremost, we find ourselves in a very competitive environment as Tanzania.
Yeah.
And because consumers have choice, whatever product you're putting out there, and I'm talking FMCG, whatever product you're putting out there, you need to ensure that you're able to influence the consumer's choice in one way or another. One of those ways is marketing.
Right. Promotions, and discounts,
exactly.
and bundles, and
correct.
matangazo.
Yep. And in a vast majority of this country, above the line may not be as effective. So you need to think of innovative ways of going below the line to ensure that you're top of mind and the consumer chooses you over the competitor. Because first and foremost, in the majority of Tanzania where consumption is happening, it's happening regardless of whether you're there or not. So you need to ensure that you go the extra mile to ensure that your product is available and known. So yes, below the line marketing, promotions, activities, etc., is a very key aspect of that. Another key aspect as well would be recognizing the economic situation of the person and appropriately pricing your product
According to their...
Yes.
Yeah, so this could be what? From an FMCG standpoint, would this be like having different sizes?
It could be sizes, definitely.
Yeah.
Ensuring that at least I'm providing something that the person who has, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 shillings in their pocket will be able to leave with my product. I think if you've gone to certain dukas, you'll see that you can even have blue band that's enough for just one use.
Yeah, kidogo tu.
Kidogo, exactly. Or people would section off sugar and they'll section it off into sachets so that someone can come and buy.
Au kuna sukari ya kupima.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's not always packaged.
It's not always packaged. Or someone would have a box of tea bag and you go and buy a tea bag. But the person has only enough money to buy a tea bag a day. So that's another form of ensuring that your product flows, is to say, okay, I recognize that the consumers in this area, this daily income is X amount. How do I ensure that I have a product, like you're saying, at the right price, but also at the right pack size or amount that they'll be able to come and purchase, even if it's every day. And I still will also be able to benefit from that. So that's it's not necessarily marketing, but it's a kind of marketing because you're actually tailoring the product
for the consumer. So it's not marketing as much as it is understanding your market, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that goes back to data, right?
That goes back to data.
Yeah.
Okay. How effective have you ever been able to use data to affect a marketing effort?
How effective? Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. Data is crucial.
Correct.
Because it helps us to make informed decisions and take calculated risks. But similar to business decisions, sometimes really good marketing ideas are not driven by data.
Correct.
Yeah, they're driven by gut instincts and the deep understanding of who your audience is.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you think of a time or share a moment when these two worked really well?
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yes. So there was a time we carried out an exercise in the lake zone, and part of the task was to collect overall census data. Now, for anyone who knows anything about census data, first of all, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
Because you're literally going and collecting data on every... Exactly. But it was census data for outlet information.
Okay.
In a particular area, not widespread, but in a particular area. So it was an exercise to go and just find out what kind of data is being, not data, sorry, but what's the outlet landscape and what are the kind of people that, what products are people buying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that particular segment where we did the study, data came through, which made us actually realize the shifting trend in product preference in a particular area. When that data gets presented to, let's say, marketing, or for example, not for example, this is what happened. They were then able to say, oh, actually, we can then tailor the messaging in this particular area in line with this gap that we're seeing in the data.
Right.
In which case, there was budget to do a campaign, but the campaign would have just been generic, meaning whatever was happening throughout the country. But because there was a particular unique issue, or let's say shift in trend, which we're observing in a particular area, the end result was a tailored campaign to address that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The specific people in that specific area.
That particular area.
Okay. And you ended up doing like a below the line approach?
So at that time, it was a promotion, which is below the line, I'm assuming.
Ish.
Yeah. But from a particular tailored promotion, as well as more visibility in terms of POS and in-store communication, outlet posters.
So location, distribution, data, data,
And
business acumen, understanding your market, understanding your audience, data.
I wouldn't say having data, but serving your audience.
Serving your
audience.
Yes.
Because ultimately you want to sell them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you, Arthur.
Cool.
Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Asante sana.
Cool.
Cheers.